The line outside the theater curled around the block, a restless coil of nerves, dreams, and quiet desperation. Performers of every kind shifted from foot to foot, clutching instruments, adjusting costumes, whispering last-minute rehearsals under their breath. Some radiated confidence, others tried to fake it. And then there was him. Arman stood near the back, almost blending into the concrete wall behind him. His clothes were simple, slightly worn jeans, a plain shirt, and shoes that had clearly walked miles. In his hands, he held nothing but a folded piece of paper, creased and softened from being opened too many times. People glanced at him, then quickly looked away, not out of respect, but dismissal. "He's not getting through," someone muttered. "Another one who thinks this is easy," another whispered. Arman heard every word, but he didn't react, because this wasn't new. Inside, the stage lights burned bright, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The judges' table sat like a barrier between dreams and reality. At its center sat Simon Cowell, arms folded, expression unreadable. He had seen it all. Or at least, he thought he had. The day had been long already. Dozens of acts had come and gone, some impressive, most forgettable. Simon leaned back in his chair, barely masking his fatigue. Next, a voice called. Arman stepped onto the stage. The moment he appeared, something shifted, not in a good way. There was no dramatic entrance, no striking outfit, no immediate hook. Just a quiet young man standing alone under the lights. Simon raised an eyebrow. "What's your name?" he asked, almost mechanically. "Arman," he replied, his voice steady but soft. "Okay, Arman," Simon said, glancing briefly at the other judges. "What are you going to do for us today?" Arman hesitated for just a second. "I'm going to sing." A barely audible sigh rippled through the room. "Of course." Another singer. Simon leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on his hand. "All right, let's hear it." No music started, no band, just silence. Arman closed his eyes, and for a moment, nothing happened. From the audience, a few people shifted impatiently. Someone chuckled. Simon's fingers tapped lightly against the desk. Then, Arman began. The first note didn't explode. It didn't demand attention. It slipped into the room like a whisper. But it was perfect. Not loud, not flashy, but pure. Simon's fingers stopped tapping. The room stilled. Arman's voice carried something unusual. Not just skill, but weight. Each word felt lived in, like it had been carved from experience rather than practiced in a mirror. The audience leaned forward. The second line came stronger. And then the third. Something was happening. Simon straightened in his chair. Because this wasn't ordinary. Backstage, a few performers who had already gone on stage turned toward the monitor. "Wait, who is that?" "I don't know," but they didn't look away. Arman opened his eyes. And now, he wasn't just singing. He was telling a story. A story of nights spent alone, of doors closed before they could even be knocked on. Of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Every note carried that truth. And it was impossible to ignore. Simon's expression began to change. Slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. Halfway through the performance, something unexpected happened. Arman stopped. The music, if there had been any, would have cut out. But since there wasn't, the silence felt even louder. A murmur spread through the audience. Simon frowned slightly. "Why did you stop?" Arman took a breath. "This next part," he said quietly, "I wrote it myself." Simon leaned back, intrigued now. "Go on." Arman started again. And this time, everything changed. The melody shifted into something deeper, more raw. His voice cracked. Not from lack of control, but from emotion pushing against its limits. It wasn't perfect anymore. It was real, and that made it unforgettable. The lyrics spoke of doubt, of being told no so many times that it started to sound like truth. Of standing in front of people who had already decided you weren't enough. Of almost believing them. Almost. Simon's eyes narrowed slightly, not in criticism, but focus. Because now, he was listening. Really listening. The audience was silent. No whispers. No movement. Just the sound of Arman's voice filling every corner of the theater. As the final chorus approached, Arman's voice rose, not in volume alone, but in conviction. This wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a declaration. The last note hung in the air. And then, silence. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire room needed a second to remember how to breathe. Then, slowly, someone stood, then another, and another, until the entire audience was on their feet. The applause wasn't immediate. It built, like a wave gathering strength. And when it finally broke, it was overwhelming. Simon didn't clap, not yet. He sat there, staring at Arman, processing, replaying every second in his mind. Finally, he leaned forward. "Arman," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "How old are you?" 19. Simon nodded slowly. "And, you've never had any professional training?" Arman shook his head. "No." A small smile tugged at the corner of Simon's mouth. "Of course you haven't." The audience chuckled softly, but Simon wasn't joking. "You know," Simon continued, "when you walked out here, I'll be honest, I didn't expect much." A few gasps from the crowd. Arman didn't flinch. "I've seen thousands of people stand where you're standing," Simon said. "And most of them, they try to impress. They try to be something they're not." He paused. "But you didn't do that." Simon leaned back, folding his arms again, but this time, his expression was different. "You were honest." The room grew quiet again. Because when Simon Cowell spoke like this, it mattered. "That first note," Simon said, shaking his head slightly. "It caught me off guard. And that doesn't happen often." A ripple of excitement moved through the audience. "But what really got me," he continued, "was when you stopped." Arman looked up, surprised. "You took a risk," Simon said. "Most people wouldn't. They'd play it safe. But you didn't." He leaned forward again. "And that's why I'm sitting here right now, genuinely speechless." The crowd erupted. Because those words, from Simon, were rare. Very rare. Simon finally began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, and the other judges joined in. "Arman," Simon said over the applause, "this is exactly why we do this show." He gestured toward the stage. "To find people like you." Arman swallowed hard, emotion flickering across his face for the first time. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But let me ask you something," Simon added, raising a finger slightly. "Why now?" The question hung in the air. Arman hesitated. Then he unfolded the piece of paper he had been holding. "My father wrote this," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Before he passed away." The audience leaned in. "He always believed I could do this. Even when I didn't." Arman looked down at the paper. "I almost didn't come today." A hush fell over the room. "But, this morning, I read this again." He looked up. "And I realized, if I didn't try, I'd be proving everyone right." Simon's expression softened, and for a brief moment, the sharp, unshakable judge seemed human. "Well," Simon said quietly, "I think it's safe to say." He paused. "You proved them wrong." The applause returned, louder than before. "Let's vote," Simon said, regaining a bit of his usual composure. The first judge didn't hesitate. "That was incredible. It's a yes." The second judge smiled warmly. "Absolutely yes." All eyes turned to Simon. He leaned back, drawing out the moment. "You know, Arman," he said slowly, "moments like this, they don't come around often." He looked directly at him. "And I don't want to overthink it." A beat. "It's a yes." The crowd exploded. Arman stood there, almost frozen. 3 yeses. It didn't feel real. As he walked off stage, the noise faded behind him, but inside his mind, everything was louder than ever. Every doubt, every rejection, every voice that had told him he wasn't enough. And then, Simon's words cut through it all. "You proved them wrong." Backstage, people who had ignored him earlier now stared in disbelief. That was him. No way. Arman walked past them quietly. Not with arrogance, not with pride, but with something stronger, certainty. Because for the first time, he believed it too. And somewhere inside the theater, Simon Cowell sat back in his chair, still replaying the performance in his mind. He had seen it all. Or at least, he thought he had. Until Arman walked onto that stage, and reminded him that sometimes, the ones you doubt the most, are the ones who leave you speechless.